Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Children's Select Committee. Our thanks again to Helena Tao for the really brief, informative briefing this morning, and we're looking at how we can make sure we bring the rest of that information we didn't have time to cover into the committee's agenda at some point in the future. So let's do the formal bits first of all. So apologies.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies have been received from Councillor Jackie Lay, Councillor Antonio Piazza, Councillor Catherine McDermott, who is substituted by Councillor Trevor Carbon.
Wonderful, thank you very much. We'll note those apologies and we move on to minutes of the previous meeting. Now, we do have a correction to do, which is to do with Joe, isn't it? I've forgotten what it was now, but I know that we had to correct Joe.
Yeah, so have I. It's something, I think it says something about my being the chair of something or other. Anyway, I have sent through the words to Marie about making sure that... Yes.
Well,
yeah,
that'll be in the minutes I'm
sent
given
it
to
through.
sign, so that's fine. Did anybody else have any other corrections or issues? No? Okay, are you happy I can sign those after the meeting as a true and accurate record? Lovely, thank you very much indeed. So, Chairman's announcements, or indeed declarations of interest. Yes, let's do those instead, shall we? I did get enough sleep last night, honest. Anybody found anything interesting? No? Okay, in which case we'll move on then to Chairman's announcements. I think we need to congratulate Jen on the announcement that she's been put permanently into post as our, it's probably about 4 mile long job title, isn't it? Oh, quite a short title. Director of Families and Children's Services.
Yes.
Excellent, well,
Thank
congratulations. I don't think I had anything else, did I? Oh, yes, I did. Sorry, and I haven't brought the... Right, bear with 1 moment. I do have something else, but I want to make sure I get my wording right, and I forgot to print the notes off for this morning's meeting. Oh, I've got somebody here who knows what they're doing. Thank you. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to start by extending our condolences to the friends and family of Helen Jones. Helen, as you know, was our Director of Commissioning and many a time was sat in this chamber during our meetings participating. Helen contributed a great deal to the committee over the years and we will miss her greatly. It came as a massive shock when I got that call saying that Helen had passed, and I'm sure that everybody shares our condolences onto the family. I would also like to extend our condolences onto the friends and family of Roger Bishton. Roger was quite an institution in democratic services here at Wiltshire Council. Some new members won't know him. Other members, he goes back for scores of years in the council. Just to put it into context, when I joined the council, Roger singled me out and asked me how a friend of mine, Jane, was doing. Jane was a Wiltshire councillor in the 1980s here. And Roger remembered working with Jane back then, so he'd been around that long. He really was a font of knowledge on all things committee related and to do with the council. And he had a real particular dedication to children's stuff, particularly school admission appeals. So Roger actually supported this committee for many years. He was the support officer when I took over as chair, and he will be fondly remembered. So our commiserations and condolences go to Roger's family, and thank you for everything that he did over the years, particularly for this committee. It says here, to finish on a lighter and happier note, we need to congratulate Jen, but I did that at the beginning, so perhaps we'll congratulate you again, Jen, just to get a bit. Any public participation?
No, there's no public participation.
Excellent. Okay. We usually consider our regular updates towards the end of the meeting, and I propose to do that rather than follow the order of items on the agenda, so as to avoid keeping officers in the meeting longer than necessary. Saying that, though, one of those officers has had to dash off to another meeting, so perhaps we'll start going through our usual updates and we'll come back for when Helene's able to join us again. So the update from the Wiltshire Youth representative. In your pack is a report from them. Worth noting in your pack that we have Eco Week taking place, but so far only 14 schools have signed up for this. So if you have any connections or links into your school, please go in there with a big stick and prod them and encourage them to take part. I think this is an exciting initiative and a real opportunity for some great core skills to be learned by those young people taking part. I will be interested to see how the debating competition shapes up. Yeah, so please push your local schools to take part in Eco Week. And of course, for everyone who was at full council, you'll remember the vibrant introduction for the corporate parenting panel given by the future leader of Wiltshire Council, Cora. I've never seen somebody more comfortable up on the the top there than Cora was that day.
When I said to her, "Where are your speaking notes?" and she said, "Here." There you go.
Please, can we make sure we pass on from the committee our congratulations to her for that? She really was something else, wasn't she? Yes, we've also got another activity taking place at the moment, and I'll be quite keen for this committee to see some of the outcomes for the activities taking place, such as the mystery shopper. We have Mr. Shopper for the integrated front door and collecting families' voice. And hopefully these outcomes will be included in the Child and Young Voice annual report. So we'll really be able to see the outcomes of those as they come. I don't think we had any other questions for the Young Voice. I'm not seeing anyone indicating. So we'll move on to school Ofsted judgments. And we've got a report here regarding the most recent Ofsted inspection reports and presenting an ongoing view of effectiveness of schools as seen by Ofsted. I know we've had the graded and ungraded outcomes included in the report for the last 3 meetings, but I wonder if it actually might be worth spending a little bit more time on this item at the next meeting, just really to catch up and to ask Andrew to give us a short presentation on these changes and what they mean for schools and the council. And maybe to talk us through some of the themes being picked up as these inspections take place, and if there's any learning there that we need to be doing. It says here, i.e. gaming and off-rolling, and certainly off-rolling could... Sorry, were you sticking your hand up, Carol? Well, off-rolling, I assume, is when they take young people off-roll.
Yes.
Yeah, Andrew, go on.
All right, Andrew, do it, yeah.
There we go.
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, so in the context of gaming and off-rolling, obviously it's when off-rolling is a context of students being taken off the roll of the school, where there's questions in terms of the timing, potentially, of children coming off roll, or where schools potentially are encouraging children to electively home educate when that isn't necessarily the parent's choice as well. Gaming will often come in the context of examination periods, so it's where, again, potentially children are encouraged to take up qualifications that are potentially more vocational, and that's not a comment on vocational qualifications, but when the child actually may want to take some more academic qualifications, but is being pushed to take qualifications that may then impact on the school's own data as well. So that is more of a secondary phenomenon. It can happen again at primary. So if you're looking at statutory testing at the end of year 6, that's again where you can look at potential gaming and off-rolling in the context of our schools. So that's it's terms used by Ofsted, and again sometimes the terminology isn't that helpful either, if I'm honest with you. Okay. So I'm Andrew Best. I'm the head of school effectiveness. Best head of school effectiveness. Thank you.
My apologies, Bridget. I didn't welcome you when I did at the beginning. We have had some changes to the membership today, and we've got Bridget joining us. Bridget actually comes with a wealth of experience in children's services. You used to be the cabinet member for it in years gone by, children and families. So years gone by. Okay. Yes, so back on track. Sorry, Carol.
Sorry, John, I did have another question. It was page 8, areas of development. It talked about books not matching the sounds. It's about phonics, but I wondered if there was a shortage of books in schools at all, if that was an issue.
I can come back on that as well. So in the context of our schools, there is financial investment in schools in terms of reading. So we work closely with the Ramsbury English Hub. So Ramsbury is one of our schools as well. As part of that offer to schools, schools can purchase reading books at a discounted cost alongside the training as well. So I think it's less of an issue in terms of the books, it's more of an issue in terms of the right books matching the sound that children are requiring. Okay.
Thank you, Carol. Looking at that, some congratulations to some schools that have gone up. Really pleased to see that, particularly selfishly, that Melksham Oak is requiring improvements to good, and the Manor Primary in my town from I assume that I was unacceptable to requires improvement, so heading in the right direction. And a special nod to Wilton Primary and St George's Primary, who I'm asked to give a special nod to. They've leapt 2 stages up, so that's very pleasing to see. What would be helpful, I think, Andrew, these reports are really, really good. I love these. But as we're building up the data over the whole year, the one thing that you always sort of start when you see is trying to work out where you ended last time and what's new this time. And I wonder if we can either sort of put grey on the schools we've already covered, or a thick line between each meeting, just so that we can see what's new this time and what were we looking at previously. So, I think it was, we spotted one other thing, didn't we? If it would be possible for the inspection outcomes table to split the inspection between graded and ungraded for ease of reading and analysing. Yep, perfect. Lovely. Did anyone else have anything else on Ofsted? No? Okay, thank you. And Maria will be in touch. We'll look for something a bit more detailed for the next time. The FE changes. So update from the Department for Education. Quite rarely for our meetings, this doesn't include a new Secretary of State this time, but we've had a number of items there. We haven't received any questions from anybody about this, and I'm not seeing anyone ask anything. So we'll take those as read. But again, a special thank you to whichever poor officer it is who writes all this up and particularly gives us the Wiltshire context on it, because I think that really makes a difference. A corporate parenting panel. I think it's unlikely we would... Oh, sorry, Trevor.
Just to get a question on that one. It's about the defibrillators for schools. Yeah. All state-funded schools in England currently without one to get one. Just wondering if we're encouraging schools to make those available to the community or not, or are they just going to be kept behind the wire? Does anybody know anything about those?
I think the short answer is no, but we can certainly make that suggestion to schools.
I think where you've got the smaller primary schools, then that might be a really good idea in the villages, isn't it? Where it would be the only one in a, yeah. So corporate parenting panel, I can't think we'll get past this without an update from Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just very briefly, you mentioned that the corporate parenting panel annual report came to full council, and the performance from Corrie, which went in very well, as mentioned by Laura. You'll be pleased to hear that there's another report coming very shortly, because that was a period of time not quite up to date. So there will be another report coming. I believe it's going to be around May, June, highlighting some of the more work that we are doing. Just very briefly then, members will recall at the last Children's Select Committee meeting, we talked about the Cannons House and how members of this committee would be able to undertake visits. I'm pleased to say that there was two open days last week at Cannons House, which some members of this committee did attend, as well as members of the corporate parenting. Kevin Darby, the Cannons House manager, says quite nicely he's got an open door policy, but I think that has its challenges rather than just turning up. So what I will suggest is that if Marie and Lisa Pullin link together, get some dates off of him, and then come back to you with some dates that members would like to attend to Cannons House. It's a great place to visit, especially in the summer. There's some wonderful views, but also to see the really good work that they're doing. So we'll work with Marie to get some dates.
Perfect, and a sensible suggestion for a way forward. Thank you. Any questions? Marie's pointing out that I skipped Schools Forum. I think that's because my head was still hurting from the training that we had on it. But did anybody have anything on Schools Forum they wanted to? No. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip the director's updates until Helene is back, and then we'll take all of those. So I think what we'll do, should we move on to item 7 now, which is the independent care review of children's social care and national review into the murders of Arthur Labingo Hughes and Star Hobson, and we'll come back to the remainder of item 6 when Helene returns. A report we wish we'd never needed, but some modest comfort in hoping that these tragedies may lead to improvements. And I was glad to see a robust set of arguments and well-founded challenges on the recommendations from the review. I think it's good that we've properly challenged that. So I'm going to hand over to, it says here, Councillor Mays, but I suspect you'll want to swiftly pass that over to Jen and Fiona too.
Yeah, I will, but I do agree with you about what the Wiltshire perspective on this, because we are doing a lot of the recommendations that come through here anyway, but in Wiltshire's way. And so it's important that we can make that distinction. But yeah, I'll hand over to the team.
Thank you. I'm Fiona Hayward, Children's Principal Social Worker. So as you can see in the report in front of you, and just a little bit of context, we had the care review conducted by Josh McAllister earlier in the year, and we've been awaiting government response in terms of action so far. And at the beginning of that, we wanted in Wiltshire to be proactive, as Laura said. So Lucy got SMT together, and we made sure that we looked at what we were doing in Wiltshire in terms of what the recommendations were for the national report regarding Arthur and Star, and also the care review. So we were really pleased that we've kind of been robust and forward-thinking and really planning ahead, far, far earlier than you could argue that we needed to. So as a result of that, the children's social care, the national framework is out for consultation. The stable homes built on love is the response to the care review by the government. And we also have a proposal around agency social work as well. So those consultations are out throughout March. And we've been encouraging social workers and practitioners in general to respond to that And we're also, it's very important to us that we have a direct lead in Wiltshire linked to Department of Education so we can influence decisions that are made. So that's the situation now. And if anybody has any questions, we'll do our best to answer them.
Okay, does anybody want to? Carol?
Around Pillar 1, family help, I noticed they have a name of a new type of worker. I think it was family help workers. Is that correct? Yeah. I would have thought that, well, was looking at health visitors, was that looked at? Because I would have thought they automatically have access to children at a very young age, and would be very useful to use. But I mean, maybe they've disappeared. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that all professionals working with children are considered, but this is quite specifically around whether or not children in a kind of social care journey could receive support from somebody other than a social worker, essentially in the recognition that there are, and we obviously already have our own support service with family key workers, but there are a vast number of those workers, highly qualified, skilled people who can work with these families, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a social worker. So it kind of is focusing on that emphasis, but clearly those family key workers will come from different kind of walks of life in terms of their backgrounds, etc.
And there is some debate around whether or not what we currently know as children in need, which is a kind of threshold for social care support, which does require a social worker to be allocated, whether or not that going forward could be a non-social work qualified practitioner, which would essentially mean in terms of thresholds, you've got people working with families where there's a level of need and potential risk. So there's quite a debate around that. There will be, you know, in terms of my personal view, it's not something that jumps out that I'm particularly keen on. But of course, there are national, you know, recruitment challenges, etc., which would assist some authorities where they do have high numbers of social work vacancies. But obviously, what we need to be thinking about is what is best for the families and whether, you know, a qualified social worker is what is required.
I'm just following up on that then. It does refer a couple of places in the report to staff shortages. And you say that we're not as short as other people, but do we have any staff shortages at the moment, albeit low perhaps? And what is the percentage take-up rate in terms of people in place as opposed to vacancies?
So we've got a 17% vacancy rate of qualified social workers. We are covering, 17, yes. We are covering that with 12% agency staff. So, you know, most of those vacancies are being covered by experienced agency social workers. 17% is around the national figure. So, you know, it is higher in other places, but that is kind of average and where other places are at. So we are working hard to clearly to recruit, but as Lucy and Fiona have referred to, there are consultations out there which look at agency staff, national career frameworks. Part of this whole care review and strategy is to have a national approach to the recruitment and retention of social workers, recognising that this is a significant issue.
Thanks. Can I just follow up again? So 17% at the moment, obviously that kind of puts pressure on other people, doesn't it? If a fifth of your number are not in place, what's the trend? Is that getting better or getting worse?
Just to clarify, so 17% on permanent staff, but because we're filling with vacancies with agency social workers, that leaves an actual 5% gap. So just to be really clear on that. And sorry, I didn't catch the end of your question in terms of pressure.
Yeah, what's the trend?
Stable, yeah.
Just to come in, because I mentor a lot of other lead members in other local authorities. Our stats are very, very good in comparison to many other, and we're certainly good within the Southwest. Yeah, so it's not an area of particular concern for us. I mean, we're always looking and recruiting, but you know, some local authorities are really struggling.
I have to say, 10 years ago, we were talking about 54% agency. So Helen.
Yeah, thanks. Linked to that, what's the retention like, and is that stable, getting better, getting worse? Do you have any figures on that?
I'm trying to think off the top of my head, which I can't actually, but we do have this information. Retention is stable, and we're looking at that data all of the time within our performance and outcomes boards to make sure that we are retaining, because that's the important part, you know, especially experienced social workers, which there are less of. So that is stable, and we compare that to the kind of corporate average within the council, and it compares well, given that this is a kind of difficult area of work.
Okay, I don't see anyone. I have to say, I found this quite a difficult report to work my way through. And it had very much the feeling for me of an awful lot of water being thrown out with the baby. I mean, there was somewhere in there, they were suggesting getting rid of IROs, which I just couldn't comprehend the common sense of getting rid of. And I'm glad that we robustly rejected that. So I do wonder if, I mean, all these reports are coming out in response to the most horrific of things that have happened, aren't they? And we've always got to get it into context. That I saw Carol, then I'll come to.
Oh, it was just about Roth. It mentions we're entering a second phase of partnership, and I just wondered what the results were of phase one.
So yes, so risk outside of the home. So that's a 5th category of child protection that we only have in Wiltshire, only place in the UK, because of the success of that in terms of the outcomes we're achieving for that group of young people. The DFE, as well as research organisations, have extended that pilot. So there are now 4 other local authorities that will become part of that. And we are continuing to clearly develop the pilot further for us, but to be part of that peer network so that this is rolled out in other places. And as you can see, the government are keen on this being rolled out further. So we're kind of part of that. In terms of formal evaluations, that hasn't happened yet, but that will be part of this next phase.
Anyone? No. Okay. Then I think all we need to do is to note that report, isn't it? Oh, yes, sorry, yes, thank you. When the findings of all of this does come out, we've all submitted our responses back now. The government inevitably are going to come up with something from it. How much of a voice do you think the local authorities will have in what that is, and how much do you think we're going to be listened to?
I have to say I'm actually quite impressed. The Department of Education have been excellent. They are holding meetings with practitioners and non-practitioners as well, actually. There's consultations that staff, I regularly remind them and try and get them to respond. I think they've actually been really good, and it seemed like a genuine consultation. Yeah.
I think also because, and Lucy will come in, but because of Lucy's role regional as a DCS, we are having a lot of direct interface with the DFE, and we are able to have a pretty, I feel certainly a very strong voice as a result of that, and equally Laura in terms of her regional roles through the LGA, etc. So I think we are definitely being listened to, is certainly my sense from a Wiltshire perspective.
Yeah, I was also just going to add at the end of the consultation, obviously there will be some activity, and there's also, it's not clear across the board, but there will be some pilots, some sort of trailblazer in terms of some of the recommendations. So there will be opportunities for local authorities to bid for some of that activity, but we haven't seen the full suite of what is going to be available on offer. But then we, of course, will decide whether or not we do want to be part of any of that and whether we put any bids forward. But it will depend on the content. And the reason for doing this so kind of robustly at this point was so that we're in a really good position to say, yes, we do want to take part in this. No, we don't want to take part in that, because either it does or doesn't align with our kind of vision and our strategy. Yeah.
Sorry. Just another one on information sharing. It says that health, police, education need to make technical changes so they can share data. I haven't known of a scheme that's ever been successful, you know. How do you feel about this one? Do you think there's any chance of it succeeding?
Yeah, I think we do share information well, actually, across the partnership at the moment. I mean, there are some, I guess there's technical solutions that would help further, potentially, but it is probably a really mixed picture nationally. So I think anything to legislate around information sharing is a positive thing.
John, I just wanted to make one final point. What I was going to say is I think this report is based on a lot of authorities that are failing and are not doing a good job. You know, Wiltshire is so much further ahead in that respect that in some ways your point about baby and bathwater, I mean, I don't mean about the IROs, but I think sometimes the sort of stuff that they're suggesting is the stuff that we're just doing day to day anyway, but they've got to say that because lots of authorities just are failing to do what we would call the basics now. But you know, the more that we do of this, obviously the better we are. But I think that's why it's a bit ABC in some ways to us as a more mature organisation.
That takes us nicely towards how we can wrap this one up with perhaps a recommendation, and that's that when the government report is published, I don't know if we know a timescale on that. Do we know a timescale on that?
Sort of, I think September we'd be expecting something.
Okay, so actually, we've got October meeting, I think, haven't we? So either to October or November, somewhere around there, might be worth bringing a report back, and then from that we can look at, you know, the recommendations that come out from there, and of course what would be really helpful, and I think I would find it helpful, I'm sure the committee would, is if there's a lot of stuff they're suggesting and we're already doing it, for us to be able to reassure ourselves that that is something that we're already doing, so we can just tick those things off and say, yeah, we're ahead of the game on this, that's happening, or yeah, we're doing that, but perhaps there's a bit of learning, and this is something that we could amend accordingly. So and that can all come in as part of the risk outside the home stuff that's going on. Yep. Excellent. Shall we go back? We jumped the director's updates, I think, because we knew that you were no, that's okay. We knew you had to go and do your other meeting. So I'm going to take us back to 6F, director's updates, and who wants to kick us off?
Well, I haven't really got any because you stole my thunder, but about Jen's appointment. So we will mention it for the third time. But what I wanted to add was we had a panel of young people who interviewed Jen. I wasn't in that section, but both obviously Jen was and HR who supported really fed back how impressed they were. And whenever I've interviewed with young people, they absolutely know the right person, you know, when there's been opportunities. And then I think in Jen's update, she was going to talk about a post, but I also just wanted to reference we had a young care experience person on that panel as well, and just incredibly insightful. So just really to share how we're using children in appointments for senior staff. It's really important.
Excellent, thank you. And it's good to know our young people are involved in that process. I think that's really pleasing to hear. Jen,
So
have you
segue
got a new job, did I hear?
I've got a new job. Thank you. So I won't introduce myself. So as Lucy said, we have actually appointed to a new head of service post, so quality assurance, partnerships and sector-led improvement. So that is a brand new post. So Tamsin Stone is in a post that currently is overseeing that side of work. We've created some additional capacity in that space that will now report to me rather than Tamsin, who currently reports to Lucy. So the work of the voice team, etc. So that will be within my responsibilities when we're talking about that, just so you know, in terms of who's responsible. And as Lucy said, you know, we have had a lot of involvement from young people in our work. We've also heard from the Family Advisory Board, and I know you've had it in your update, so I won't repeat it, but I myself attended a Family Advisory Board, and a couple of the parents who were there with lived experience of working with social care, the insights that they can give us into shaping our practice are genuinely invaluable. And I think that, you know, this is what we are embedding throughout our work continuously, is listening to the voice of young people, families, so that we really can improve our practice in that regard by hearing their voices. So a couple of other updates as my computer suddenly crashes. So Councillor Hutton has mentioned, so Cannon's House is our registered children's home. providing short breaks to children with disabilities. As you're aware, in June we had an inspection last year, so the services currently requires improvement. So it's an Ofsted registered provision. We had an assurance visit on the 14th of February, and that is exactly to provide them with assurance, so very specifically in relation to, are children safe? Are there any concerns in relation to the care that's being provided? We had a very positive outcome report from that. The letter hasn't yet been published, but obviously when it is, I will make sure that I send it over and you can obviously see that. But they were assured, essentially, as the outcome of that visit, so they found no concerns at all. There were a couple of relatively minor, if I can put it that way, recommendations of things we need to do, but that was very positive in terms of the continued trajectory and performance around Cannons House. So we will expect within the next year another full graded inspection, so we will wait to see when that happens, but we're on good track in terms of progress with that. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention is that our one of our resource centres, so Trowbridge Resource Centre, has had a big refurb and revamp. So this is one of our centres that children have family time with their parents and families when they're not living with them. So you'll probably remember that Melbourne House in Devizes was one of those 3 resource centres. We made the decision to close that and have kind of the capacity of those 2 within Trowbridge. So that kind of reopened and Law was part of that. So that's really exciting in terms of, and again, if, we can send details, worth a visit, because it's just very child friendly and is really giving children a very good, positive experience when they're having that time with their children, which is clearly what matters. And I don't know if Law wants to add to that, but really positive achievement in terms of that work. So that was my updates. Thank you.
Well, I've got my own agenda item, I see, 6G, so.
Brilliant. Helene? Well, did anyone have any questions for Jen, actually? How's she settling in, anything like that, Helene?
One works, Helene. Helene.
Okay, thank you. So for those of you who weren't there at the pre-meet this morning, I've got some updates in terms of SEND provision. So Salisbury Academy for Inspirational Learning School, 150 learners for 4 to 19 pupils, young people, will be opening in September 2023, and that'll be part of Reach South Academy. It's going to be eventually in the UTC building down in Salisbury. That's going through a refurb now, and the DfE are managing that refurb. So in the interim, for the period of probably the autumn term, the children are going to be in different accommodation around the city. That's all been sorted out through the DfE. We're going to continue with the Reach South that's in the Sarum site. But from the beginning of 24, that school will be, the building will be occupied. So the school comes into being from the 1st of September, and the children then will move into their new build from 1st of January 2024. So really pleased about that. Silverwood, due for completion in autumn 2023. And this is the school that Wiltshire's invested a significant amount of money into in the Roud campus to create the state-of-the-art school for 350, 4 to 19 pupils, children, young people, with a predominant focus on complex SEND. Downlands, we're expanding places at Downland using our capital from the DfE to provide this, and this is really to look at the children who would otherwise move into independent, non-maintained settings, expensive placements outside the council, and Downlands are really working well with us to develop this provision. We were successful with our free school bid. We heard at the beginning of March about that being successful for another free school for 130 places for children with SEMH, social, emotional, mental health. Now, as we've got sale opening in Salisbury, this one is going to be more in the north of the county. We've got a few potential sites that we will work with the DfE to narrow it down to the one site. And once we have that, we will share that with you. We also worked with Reach South to place a bid for an AP free school, alternative provision free school. So we talked about the SEND green paper, the SEND and AP green paper, how the government is now looking at AP alongside SEND and using it as a means of supporting children to keep their mainstream places. Well, we put a bid in for an 80-place AP free school to the DFE with Reach South. They're the academy that will be running this if we're successful, and we hope to hear early summer whether we have been successful. And that's going to be a split site. So we're going to have some places in the north and some in the south. And there's ongoing work around resource bases in primary, as always, the primary to meet the needs, and colleagues who are in the earlier session heard about the numbers coming through the system to make sure we get those places in, but also 3 additional new places in secondary schools for resource-based provision there, so that we can have a pathway for children in resource bases in a primary to transition into resource bases in a secondary. And then the last bit from me, Chair, since the DFE updates, we kind of missed this one. We've had the response to the SEND and AP green paper, so it might be worth us spending a bit of time on that next time, because there's quite a bit of work that's going to impact this year. So they've given us a timeline in terms of this year, the work that's going to take place around the local inclusion partnership, what that looks like. There's quite a bit that's coming downstream for us, so perhaps we could do a briefing just on that for members next time. Thank you.
Yeah, we'll look to build a briefing on that into the forward work plan. Excellent. Any questions for John?
Thank you, Chair. I think that's absolutely wonderful news. I must confess, there was quite a lot in that that I absolutely knew nothing at all about. So I think that's really wonderful. And you and I, John, were members of the task group on SEND some years ago, which I think is still standing. I'm not sure, but anyway, it'd be wonderful if that information which we've got could actually be put into the domain of the committee, if you see what I mean, because I was unable to make notes as Helene was mentioning it. And I think that's really good news, that it would be wonderful if members could actually have a copy of that, if I may.
It will certainly be reflected in the minutes of the meeting, and some of it would have been in the slides from the briefing this morning, which Marie will be circulating as well. So we'll make sure that that does get out to everybody, yes. No worries. Anybody else? Mark?
Yeah, quick one. I've been chatting to a couple of primary schools recently, and 2 of them said to me that they haven't received any data for the last few years, data such as birth rates and stuff like that, so they can plan for the coming year. It was just a bit of a coincidence that a couple of schools had mentioned that. I wondered, are we still sending that information out?
Yes, we are sending the data out. So if you could let me know the schools, that's sent to every school on an annual basis. But also the school's planning strategy has been shared with all schools. That's it's in draft at the moment. It's out for comment. So hopefully they've seen that as well. And that's been on newsletters. It's been on head briefings. It's been sent direct to schools as well. So perhaps if you could share the names of the schools, we can make sure they're checking. Thank you.
Lucy?
Just wanted to give another quick update that came to mind. So the children's home tender is out at the moment. So bids close the end of this month. So by the end of April, we should know who we're awarding that contract to. So that's really exciting. So because we've got the 2 homes ready and waiting for the provider, and that will really help with our sufficiency issues.
We have a site to opening them. With sites are opening
Well,
them
before the end of the year.
before the end of the
Yeah.
year. Lovely, excellent. And I had a question for Helene, if I could, which is with the AP provision coming in. At the moment, of course, we've got the service level agreement with schools, haven't we, with regards to, and I believe, if my memory serves correct, that current agreement comes to an end, is it next year?
End of March, this March.
This March. What's the plans on sort of the way forward on that?
Okay, so that's out for schools to sign again for another 3 years. In fact, we met with the governance group this morning. There are some minor changes to that. So Ofsted have published a
a framework for a thematic review of AP, and that's made us just look at the SLA and make sure we've got the definition right within that. So it's going out again today to all heads or schools with some minor tweaks, and we'll put those as track changes so they could be seen with a view that schools will sign up again. It's also going out with the draft AP strategy. So my colleagues, Teresa McElroy has been visiting all of the schools, and she's strategic lead for AP, hearing about how the money's been used, the impact of that spend, what the challenges are, and all of that intel from all the schools have been brought back together into a draft strategy for AP. So in terms of what the next steps are for us, that really outlines that, because it's kind of doing two functions now. It's doing the bit that the SLA was doing, where, you know, predominantly they're young people who need a little bit of additional support, but it's also looking at what the SEND Green Paper was outlining with that as well. So it might be worth us bringing that, that strategy here for members to have a look at.
So are we confident head teachers are going to sign the new SLA? And what's our plan B?
Okay, so we're pretty confident most will. There are some we have to have more conversations with, you know, as you will know, John. The plan B is if they don't, then it reverts back to schools will follow what the head can do legally, which they could do even under the SLA. So, you know, the law is the law, whether they sign the SLA or not. It just means that they will not have the funding, and the LA will then take responsibility for those young people. They will source the resource that's needed, but then they'll also get those young people back into school as well when the time is right. It does mean that those schools that don't sign the SLA will not receive that funding, and we know lots of our schools use that really early on in a child's school, a young person's school career, for that prevention, that early support. So the schools won't have that resource available to them.
Thank you. Oh, Bridget.
Thank you. Lucy, I just heard you say something about 2 new children's homes, which looks like we're going round in circles over a period of 10 to 15 years. Yeah, so I just wondering what the rationale was behind it this time.
So, I mean, basically sufficiency of places. So it's become, you know, increasingly challenging to find residential places for children. Obviously, if we are not running, so we won't run them as a council, but we will commission a provider to run them on our behalf. If we don't commission homes, then we can't guarantee that there will be homes available within Wiltshire either. So we would just rely on the market to open and run homes who may not be providers that we necessarily want to work with or are the best providers to work with. Obviously, we've got more control if we go through this tender and commissioning process ourselves, and we'll increase the number of places up to 12 residential places within Wiltshire for our young people, and it increases the offer and choice.
So is that 2 homes for 6 each?
So it's at least, no, it's 2 homes, potentially 3, but we've got 2 buildings at the moment. And also within the arrangements, it will provide an option for us to use the provider who may have homes in other areas as well. Because obviously when you've got children living in a residential home, it's really important that the matching is appropriate. So I think we're looking at about kind of 3 beds, 3-bedded units.
Okay, thank you. It was interesting to know. I just remember from the last time there were problems with the procurement and pricing, and it didn't go terribly well, I seem to recall.
Obviously, we'll go through the tender process. If for example, pricing is a significant issue, then we will have to review that. But I think indications are that there have been some good interest, so that should hopefully open up the competition, which is good.
Watch this space. Okay, thank you very much. So did Nora?
Is this my bit now?
This is your bit now.
Okay, so I've been crossing off all the things I was going to say, not least about obviously the appointment of Jen. Most things have been said, but there are 2 things I want to add. One was Lucy and I went to visit Trinity Primary School in Great Cheverel a couple of weeks ago, which has just been judged outstanding, and it really was outstanding, and it was a very, very inspirational visit. And if we could just clone schools like that across the county, we'd be rocking. And they didn't have amazing facilities or huge amounts of money, but it was just top quality teaching, and it just shows what can be done with good leadership. And so the only other thing that I wanted to add was just about the peer review, the LGA's peer review of Wiltshire Council. And I just wanted to make special note of the fact, I'll just read it here. It says, nowhere is a focus on improving outcomes for some of the most vulnerable in the community more evident than in children's services at Wiltshire Council. The council has delivered a successful improvement programme with their last inspection report in 2019, noting that the determined and well-focused leadership combined with the corporate resolution of elected members has paid dividends for the children of Wiltshire. I just think as a council, we should acknowledge, as a committee, I think it'd be good to acknowledge that, because you and I, more than anyone, know the work that's gone into getting us to that stage. And certainly when I was being interviewed by the peer review team, it was clear they were very, very impressed with what's going on here in children's services.
Thank you. And I think it is worth noting the peer report. Peer reports are independent reports. They come in and they look and tell it as it is. And it's nice in this instance that they've said nice things, because I've seen versions in the past that don't. So, and certainly versions for other authorities still that don't. So, yes. Suzanne, did you have anything from SEND that you wanted to update us on? No is a perfectly acceptable answer.
It is the answer, yes. Although I have to say, Cannon's House, I did pop in, absolutely phenomenal, the change that they've made in the actual physical part of the building, the things on the wall and all of the decorations. They put so much care and effort into that, and I think it's really brilliant that they've done that. Yeah. So sorry, that's off the top of my head.
No, that's fine. And Peter, did you have anything additional? No, covered it. Brilliant. Okay. So chair's update, not an awful lot, I don't think, for you from the chair, unless Marie starts prodding me all of a sudden. But the one thing I did want to say is, and I've lost it now, but I'm heading up to a conference a week on Monday, all about young people's voice up in Manchester, which I'll report back on. I'm actually going up to that, and this was the other thing I wanted to just make the committee aware of, as part of an initiative being run by the Wiltshire Community Foundation at the moment, looking at how we can try and bring together youth work across the county, because there's little bits of youth work happening in various places, and Margaret Firth there is spearheading it, but we've got a group that's coming together and looking at how we can try and get some form of county body working better. There's some funding that's come in for that, and we seem to be in line for some further funding, and there's outside advice supporting it. So that's a really positive project, and Jackie is in the centre of what's happening with that, Bridget. So yeah, it really is coming together, and hopefully from that we can have some good things come. I'll report back to you in due course. But nothing else from me. Item 7 we've done. So Shaping the Future programme of schools. To receive an update on the programme, Councillor Mays, Helene Hughes and Andrew Best.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so obviously the report's been circulated, so this takes us through a kind of timeline of activity as a council off the back of the government white paper, or was the government white paper in 2022, and then changes in terms of our approach as a local authority, one, in reflection of the white paper, and some of that activity continues, and then two, it's in relation to our approach to school improvement for the next 3 years. I think the key thing here within this document is an emphasis on collaboration and schools working in hubs or partnerships, and in no schools being isolated as well. So that's a summary take in terms of the document. There's been a lot of activity, and that's been working with Maintain Schools, consulting on the new draft school improvement framework, that's actually going to go live later this week, on Thursday this week, but also engaging closely with our academy trusts as well, in order that if schools are looking at academisation as an option, that they're actually doing it with the right due diligence and information at hand to be able to make an informed decision.
Excellent. Okay, short and sweet. Joe.
Thanks, John. Just a quick couple of questions, Andrew. One is, I'm conscious that obviously as you talk about the family of schools model and whether that's academies or then maintained schools forming collaborations and groups. So I suppose there's that view of how many schools or even as a percentage do we feel might be slightly adrift at the moment, i.e. aren't within some kind of network that they feel is working for them. And then the other question that's gone from that side of my brain and straight out of that ear, which was, oh, I know what it was. I know you've been running, or there has been run, Meet the Multi-Academy Trust sessions. You know, come and get a free pen and they'll talk to you about their Multi-Academy Trust. And I just wondered whether you've seen much engagement with that and how those have gone.
Yeah, no, really, really good questions, and happy to answer both. So in terms of our schools, all our maintained schools will be in a family of schools and a hub of schools by September. So our regional leads are working with them on the ground. They're working with existing groups. We've got a number of quite well established existing groups, got things like the Hobbs Alliance up in Malmesbury area, for example, got Compass Schools down in the southwest. So that's a role of my regional team pulling that together. I think the key within that as well is we've got some standalone academy trusts as well that want to be part of that framework. So deliberately in the new framework, we've actually put that opportunity for standalones to join maintained schools in that group of schools. And I think the feedback, certainly from some of our standalones, is they've really welcomed that because it can be quite isolating. We may well also attract some really small mats. So we've got some multi-academy trusts where you're talking a couple of schools or maybe 3 schools. They're really small. And again, under this framework, they'll have to trade and obviously buy service because that's the way in terms of how funding is structured. But again, it's about no school being isolated. So I'd be really confident that by the end of the summer term, no school in Wiltshire will be isolated. I think there's always going to be that little grey area where we've got some standalone that are really quite independent and they're quite successful. They may not want to either be part of a trust or of our school employment framework moving forwards. But I'd be confident that actually the work we're doing on the ground now, we've got a meeting on the 15th of May as well, we're getting all our schools together again to then look at, again, some examples of some really good collaborative practice. And we're going outside as well, so we've got some examples being shared within our own local authority in terms of strong collaborations with schools, but also where we're working outside our local authority with other schools as well. In relation to your second question, we put on a series of academy roadshows with the main emphasis and aim of that was to be able to create a safe space for school leaders and governors that are interested in looking at academies where they've got an opportunity to talk to real people practically on the ground. I think there's a danger sometimes that without those types of opportunities, schools could approach or make the wrong approaches potentially to trusts that aren't aligned with the vision and ethos that individual schools have. Overall uptake, we've had 60 attendees across the roadshows. We ended up combining the East and the West as a single event. Feedback has been positive in terms of then people having an opportunity to have those informal conversations, to gather information as well. And I think post-COVID as well, it was quite nice. And the Trust was saying it was nice to be in a room together as well with each other. But also, you can ask those silly questions sometimes you can't ask in a broader forum. So there's been interest. Whether that equates to longer term schools moving to academies, I don't know. But I think it's I suppose our duty as well is to facilitate so that when schools are making decisions, they can make it from an informed basis.
Anybody else? Carol.
Again, under family of schools, say a town decided all the primary schools would be part of the same one. Are you pushing that model at all, or no? So it's up to them.
No,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Okay. That probably makes it more difficult. I was just wondering if, if that were the case, would they then be able to share some specialist teachers, to go into all those schools? I mean, maybe they do that now.
And they're good questions. So in terms of families of schools, what we're wanting is a really strong maintained school offer for our maintained schools. It doesn't have to be geographical as well. So there may be some schools, we've got schools that are partnering, work really well together, that cut across our regional boundaries as well within Wiltshire. So still within Wiltshire, but cutting across different regional areas. And that's about relationships as well, and around ethos and vision too. So the collaborations may not necessarily work absolutely geographical. It's around schools that collaborate and can work constructively together. In terms of sharing resource, that's that kind of longer term process of effective collaborative working. So if you've got sort of 5 or 6 small schools, then you potentially could look at some shared resource, some potentially shared staffing, etc. across that range. There's also sort of collective buying power sometimes. In terms of if you're buying people into school, you're buying it across 5 schools as well.
And can I just say, Carol, wearing the war wounds of a town that went down the route you were suggesting, and trust me, it's not always good to have an academy trust of all the schools in one town. Well, you wanted to come back with another then? You were sticking your hand up again.
I did. It's, I think it was item 14. Oh, no, I think you covered that. You said that you hope everybody will be in a hub by this September. And I was wondering when I read the report whether that was a bit too ambitious, but you seem quite confident about that.
No, we like a bit of ambition. I think we need to be ambitious because it's about schools not being isolated. And I think actually our regional leads know our schools really well, and our school improvement advisors know our schools really well as well. So, there's a bit of nudging, pushing sometimes for people to partner up. But we're really confident we can get all our schools in hubs by September. Yep.
Thanks, John. Andrew, to push you a little bit more on Joe's question, is there a sense that schools feel more scared about remaining in a maintained status, more attracted to, more pushed to an academy trust? And from the council perspective, is there a point at which it becomes difficult or unsustainable to maintain the current split?
Okay, I'll comment there. Hilly, you might want to comment on that as well. I think what we're not seeing, candidly, is we're not seeing a huge swathe of schools that are moving towards trust status. Okay, I think I think what schools are doing, and governors are rightly doing, is looking at options, and that's part of that governance role as well, is to look at your options moving forwards. So where we've got sponsored academies, so if a school is either defined as coasting or inadequate, then actually, obviously, academisation, we know that what happens there in terms of schools then joining trust, but we're not seeing a significant number. So therefore, our maintained school offer needs to be strong, it needs to be attractive, and I think we've got a good offer for our maintained schools. I think long term, further down the line, there always comes a point around, I suppose, manageability. So if you're looking at Bath and North East Somerset, where the numbers of maintained schools are really low, that becomes much harder then to deliver that school, potentially to deliver that school improvement offer. But you're talking 5, 6 schools there that are, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head at the moment, but it was 5 when I worked in my previous role in another council. You're talking 5 schools there. That's a significantly less number than we're talking at the moment. 120 maintained schools, over 120 in Wiltshire. So, that is significant for us to discharge our functions and do a good job.
Yeah, okay, thanks. And then your proposed model about the hubs and the regions. If schools start going academisation out of those hubs, how dynamic is that model going to have to be?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think from a regional director's point of view, from a DFE point of view, they are looking ultimately at schools joining in groups. So if you're looking more broadly around education and where successes are had in education, a lot of that comes back to strong collaboration anyway. Whether that's in maintain schools collaborating, or whether that's through a trust model. Okay, so that there is traction around high levels of collaboration. So, longer term and further down the line, there may be groups of schools that actually say we really, really valued working together. We might want to then go as a group to join the Multi-Academy Trust. That may well happen in due course.
Anybody else?
Yes, sorry, just coming back on that. It was about, okay, if an entire group of schools in a hub moves off into an MAT or creates an MAT, then fine. What happens if a small number of schools opt out of that? Then your hubs are going to have to sort of rejig around, expand over time.
Yeah, and that's flexibility. I suppose a bit of flexibility in the system as well for hubs and hubs may change or settle down over a couple of years as well. So, there needs to be, or there is flexibility within the model for that to take place as well.
I think it's such an ever-changing landscape, it's impossible to know what to do. I mean, my continuing fear on this process is that at some point we will get to that point that you were describing in a previous authority, Andrew, and I think that point will be closer to 120 than it is to 5, when it actually is no longer economically viable for us to be able to support the maintained schools that we're legally responsible to maintain. And how that will be done, I do not know. And that's the bit that keeps me awake at night on all this. Laura.
I mean, to Bridget's earlier point about children's homes sort of going through a cycle, I've now been in this long enough to say it's gone from you can go to academies if you want to, then it's compulsory, and now it's sort of the worst of both worlds, because the white paper was withdrawn, and at least we could have said to them, look, you've all got to be there for 2030 so we can plan, and now that's sort of gone away again. It leaves us in this limbo, and that I have seen the wave come and go so many times now. So thank God for a good solid team at Wiltshire Council who's held on to that, because I think it was Swindon who completely removed their entire education department and then had to quickly bring it back when they realised that the tide had gone the other way.
But of course, the challenge is it's not just those that we may maintain now. You're talking about the orphan academies coming back in and trying to work with, because we've got so many different versions of so many different things out there, haven't we? That it's
dog's dinner.
So we know there's an awful lot of change in this system. When we planned those academy roadshows, we had a white paper, therefore it was a response to that. We continued even the white paper had gone. This is a system that we think no matter what happens nationally, these schools are stronger together. So whether they go academy together, their stay is maintained. This is around thinking about the here and now for these children. We do need to look to the future, but we don't really know what the future is going to be, do we? We may have a couple of years in this area, and we just have to make sure that this is working for our children here and now, and our focus is on making sure that every child goes to a good or better school. So that's what this is for, but we do know there's a flex in that. We can accommodate movement in and out of this system, and in fact that's good because you can get a bit cozy in your relationship. 2-3 years working with the same heads, you kind of you don't see things the same way. So moving relationships around, moving schools into different hubs kind of freshens them up a bit and brings that new challenge as well. So, you asked a really good question in terms of what would this look like for the local authority. Well, we are working on that, and we're looking very carefully at the rate that are academising. It's very low, because what we need to do then is adjust our plans internally. And I mean that in terms of the capacity internally. So we do know all of that in terms of just watching that. We knew where we were going 2030. Now it's really waiting to see what the schools decide to do, and we will then take that and think, okay, if that's the trend, let's start and plan from there.
Yeah, I mean, thanks, Celine. I agree. But my concern is actually what we're doing now is moving back to a more firefighting, short-term type approach in terms of policy. So when you're looking at education, you're trying to plan 3 or 4 years in advance in a school, because you have to prepare what, in the secondary school environment, what GCSEs are you going to do, what A-levels are you going to take? And that commits, if you think A-levels, that commits you to a 2-year curriculum offering with whatever lead time in that needs. So, and it's not, I'm not criticizing you because it's the environment that you're now finding yourselves in, but the observation is that makes it very difficult for any educational establishment to do any kind of medium-term planning. I mean, actually, I would say in a school's environment, that's short-term planning, because a medium-term planning would be taking you up to 2030 by now. Short-term planning, they need to know what they're doing for 2026. And the structure around us, as you say, it's moved one way quickly, moving back another way quickly, and that makes it very, very difficult for schools to have any kind of forward thinking.
I absolutely agree with you in terms of schools. They have gone from here to here, and they've kind of, the change in policy has been difficult for them. But it's our role to make sure that they can find a way through that, whether it's academisation, whether it's maintained, that they deliver the best quality education. But absolutely, yeah, it's very difficult, for them to plan long term.
Okay, so I think your way forward on this is great. You're going to have this place in place for September. I wonder if the best thing we can do is to arrange a briefing for the chair and vice chair, which, remember, in our new way of working, would normally be done by teams, and anybody would be welcome to attend. But it just stops us clogging up these agendas with too much feedback work. So a briefing in September to see where we are and to consider whether we need to bring it back to full committee or whether we're sort of on track and could look at something in 12 months.
We can get a couple of heads to come and talk about that process as well, so they can share what it's like on the ground as well. Useful about that.
Yep, that'll be good. Okay, so moving on to item 9, the Standing Advisory Council on Religious Education. So hopefully you all received an email from Marie, which gave you a brief overview of what SACRA means. The cover report has been updated by the author to include this information, but the previous report was also, unfortunately, included in the agenda. So I think this is Laura, Helene and Andrew again.
Okay, yes, so again, one of my reports. So, and in terms of an overview, in terms of SACRA, I think succinctly, SACRA advises our schools in the matters of religious education, depends on the structure and the nature of the school, and in terms of collective worship as well. It is the duty of SACRA to provide an annual report that's shared with the Secretary of State, but it's also then shared with key partners and obviously members as well, and elected members as part of that process. The report covers a range of different activity that SACRA has undertaken. Within SACRA, we have an advisor, Laura Harris, who's mentioned in the report, that discharges many of the responsibilities. Our SACRA meet on a relatively regular basis in terms of their meetings. And then the kind of groundwork is undertaken by Laura, who then supports schools, whether that's through annual conferences, whether that's through individual input and advice to schools, or whether that's schools then accessing some of the opportunities, for example, like the WIRE Award, which is a new one for us in Wiltshire, successful in the local authority I was in previously, around training and advice as well. So again, happy to take any questions from members in terms of the SACRA report.
Okay, anybody got anything? Carol?
I noticed the annual conference was on the 3rd of February this year. What was the attendance like? Because the year before was quite low, really, with just about, I think, three teachers attending, some in person, some online. So was it any better this year?
I'd need to go and find the numbers. So in terms of the numbers, I don't attend the conference myself, but I can find the numbers out and we can get the numbers back to you in terms of the numbers. I think from a SACRE perspective, they have been impacted in the past by COVID in particular in terms of some of the attendance.
Anybody else? I noticed we pay £10,300 for this service. We seem to be getting, from what you were suggesting we got for it, quite a lot of value for money. The diocese, I assume, are topping this up. No?
No, there's no top up from the diocese. So yes, we do pay, and you can look at the. So if you look at NASA, the National Association in terms of SACRE, then you can look at comparatively what different local authorities pay their SACREs to discharge their responsibilities. I would say, you've got obviously a dedicated advisor for RE in the context of Laura. She does work exceptionally hard in terms of her time and commitment as well. I'd say it was good value for money in terms of what is offered. But it's quite a tight contract in terms of her time, and some of that is in terms of meeting time, and then some of that is providing training, conferences, and support, again, for individual schools.
Is anyone in your team encouraging the WIRE award, or is that just down to the diocese?
No, that's down to us. So we are encouraging that and through things like the head teachers briefings as well. So Laura Harris, our advisor, spoke at our last heads briefing in terms of, one, the SACRE offer, but two, also in the context of aspects like the WIRE award as well. So it's something that's very new to us in Wiltshire. It's been successful in other local authorities. We've also got some schools that have been awarded it this year, and we're expecting those numbers to increase. So it's through those kind of regular heads briefings and through our newsletters and communications as well. And I will say to Laura's new to us. Laura's keen, proactive, and so that's good in terms of an active items on agendas at the relative meetings as well.
So just a couple more for me. You said the annual report goes to the Secretary of State and then trickles down various other bodies. I think this is the first time I recollect us taking a SACRE report at Children's Select. Should this be something that we are regularly taking?
Yes, it should. Yeah, so it's an annual report and you should have cited it on an annual basis.
Okay. And who's monitoring the performance and the value for money on the contract?
So the members, so the committee members will look at value for money in terms of the work that Laura undertakes. And then, as that is a service level agreement with the local authority, then I will also meet with chairs of SACRE and with Laura as well to evaluate and assess progress that's been made in terms of activity.
Okay. And when you talk about members, we're talking about the members of the SACRE. But unfortunately, Antonio's not with us today, but I think Antonio does sit on that, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Is that as a council representative?
Yes, that's correct.
Do we have other council representatives on there?
Well, I need to check on my membership.
Oh, Stuart Palmer.
Yeah.
Lovely. Okay. I would suggest then that we need to look at how we take the annual report. I wonder if this is one to bring along to the standing task group to have a look at and then be able to bring back. Sorry, were you sticking your hand up, Mark? No. And then back into committee through there. How do members feel? Does that sound like members of the standing task group are looking overjoyed at the prospect of... Helen was smiling more than you, Joe. Okay, so we'll look at that, how we can bring that in on that. Fine, okay. Moving on to item 10, Performance Outcome Report, Academic Year 21-22, Pupil Performance in Tests and Examinations. So,
Thank you. Thanks again. Okay, and I'll give a kind of brief summary and then take any questions. I would say when you're looking at any of the kind of performance outcome reports, I'd always look at it in the context of our Ofsted report as well. So the two kind of chime for me because you're looking at the quality of education and where we are nationally, and then looking at our national performance outcomes. And there are some parallels between the two, I do have to say. I think the profile's mixed in terms of performance. There's some strengths in the early years and post-14. What I do like in the report, if I'm honest, is the line, I'm just trying to find my line here, around the pupils going on to or remaining in education, employment and training. So there's like a curve for me that we start well in the early years, relatively well in Key Stage 1, and then you go to that performance again, Key Stage 4, Key Stage 5, and there is some strength in performance there. You'll have picked up from the data and the information in terms of disadvantaged learners remains a key priority for us as a local authority. There's some strength, particularly in the primary phase around reading. There's strength in mathematics at secondary, and that often will parallel again in terms of our Ofsted reports. There is a more positive profile for SEND learners overall, and when you're comparing it with national comparators. So again, there's lots of work to do. There's some strengths there, but I suppose strategic areas of focus to take us forward as well, particularly around disadvantaged learners. Happy to take any questions.
Go.
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks, Andrew, for the report. No surprise probably that I'm jumping on with regards to the disadvantaged learners' perspective, because that gap certainly in some of it just you can see the impact that's having, and I guess some of that would be my concern. So I'm gonna have the basic overall question, which is going to say, how do we feel the disadvantaged learners strategy, which I know has kind of been worked on and we had reports on last year, how we feel that is now having positive, hopefully, impacts on where we are. Because when I look at the year 6 SATs, I think it's page 88, and we're ranked 95 in that combined reading, writing and maths, which is quite a low place. So first of all, just looking at that, you think, so that's going to have a knock-on effect as people move into secondary. And are we clear we've got strong enough mitigation to deal with that? That's just in general with learners. And then when you look at most of then the tables that come out, the gaps between the all pupils percentages and the disadvantaged percentages for Wiltshire are generally significantly worse than the national gap. Yeah. Even though our gap between disadvantaged national and Wiltshire might not be so big, the gap between our overall and our disadvantaged, and that's the one that really makes me twitch, technical term, obviously. So I suppose it is that overall piece, year 6 SATs, we seem to be struggling, and that's going to have an impact on secondary. Where are we clear about mitigation? And then that whole disadvantaged learners piece, seeking reassurance, really.
Okay, so if I start, Hilly may want to come in as well. So in terms of our workplace, yes, you're right in terms of highlighting the gaps, and the gaps aren't good enough, bluntly. I'd argue that still comes back to the quality of education. So there is that link back to potential Ofsted performance as well, where you do tend to see a better profile of schools, because our percentage for students is actually better than national. Our percentage of schools is less so, which is interesting. So, there is that piece of work still to do around the quality of education and understanding some of the needs of our disadvantaged learners on the ground. In terms of our workflow, it's a priority within the Wiltshire Learning Alliance. So we've got a subgroup that are looking specifically at disadvantaged learners. And again, there's toolkits, training, support that goes with that, including audits and support for individual schools on the ground as well. We are, just as a side point, I also forget to say, we've got a big disadvantaged learners conference as well in the autumn term. We've got Mark Rowland, who is the eminent speaker around disadvantaged as well, attending a session. But also it's looking more widely at not just the children, but families as well, in the context of providing some of that support on the ground. So I think in terms of some of the work, there's a lot taking place. I think in terms of outcomes, I think always the challenge, and is around the time sometimes it takes to then reflect back into the data as well. So, it's highlighted. We've also got the strategy. That will, for me, still take time then to begin to impact more in terms of our data and statistics. I don't know, Helene, whether you want to come in or not.
Only briefly, it is a huge priority for us. You know that, you've done a piece of work on this. The Learning Alliance have taken this forward, but I would reflect in terms of Ofsted that I don't think pupil premium is getting the prominence that we feel it should have. And obviously, Ofsted is a huge body, hugely important. And if we look at some of the outcomes, the recommendations, we rarely, I can't remember the last time I saw pupil premium outcomes. So there's something about us, we need to keep this alive and we need to be the champions here. So the Learning Alliance are doing that. It's really good that we are doing this. We've got that piece of work, but I think we have to keep on doing this and being that champion, that voice, and making sure schools continue to look at this cohort and use that funding really wisely.
And it's when people go in as well, Helene. So if you've got advisors going in, it's looking, if you're looking at the quality of education, one of the conversations we often have is looking at the quality of education through the lens of SEND or disadvantaged people as well. So you're actually, making a conscious effort to look at what does learning look like in the context of a child who's got pupil premium, in the context of a child with special educational needs as well.
Right, just to come back on that, maybe I might have zoned out, it's right at the beginning, but where we're talking about that dip for that year 6 SATs results, do we feel that that's potentially an impact of that COVID and how that's going through? And are we comfortable having seen, reasonable results above that? Is the impact that has then going into secondary really as to how, because our secondary results are doing okay, but if you follow that year 6 SATs through, if it followed on that, we'd continue to go backwards.
I still think we do that curve generally in Wiltshire. So if we can close that curve at the end of Key Stage 2, that should actually impact further up in terms of your Key Stage 4 performance. In terms of COVID, I think I wouldn't want to use COVID as an excuse for underperformance, because obviously you're looking at, you're comparing with national data. So I do think COVID impacted, but it impacted, every local authority and every school, I suppose, in a similar way. So, yeah, for me, it's about addressing some of those issues at the end of Key Stage 2 as well, and some of that was coming back to mathematics was an area in particular of focus. And then it's obviously working with our secondaries, picking that up in terms of Key Stage 3.
Yep. Happy, Joe? Helen.
Yeah, thanks, John. I mean, Joe's asked pretty much most of my questions anyway, but this is, as John said, for another report, this is one I think where a year-on-year comparison also would be useful. Do we have the percentage of people who are in the disadvantaged group out of all pupils, and how much of a crossover of that is with SEND pupils? And then I've got some questions which Helene has talked about around the efficacy of pupil premium spend and how is that monitored. And also, it strikes me that a lot of these figures may be impacted by the traditional primary school underconfidence in teaching maths. And is there stuff that we can do there to support and encourage primary schools to develop their skills further?
Okay. They're always good questions, and you might have to come back because I might not have recorded all the questions as well. I can probably answer the last one first. I've answered the last one first in terms of mathematics at primary level. We do encourage, so we do have a list of uptake in terms of mathematics support. We have a Maths Hub, the Mobius Hub that work with a number of our schools in terms of the provision for mathematics. And again, within their role and some of the support they're doing with schools on the ground, then we'll also look at the support and teaching for disadvantaged students as well. And that will look at pedagogy, that will look at classroom practice as well, okay, which is obviously really, really important. And I've really poorly logged some of your other questions as well, so you might have to go back the other points as well.
It was the percentages of pupils within the disadvantaged and SEND categories and what the crossover is, and also how we, because Elaine, you referenced this in a bit, how we actively monitoring the efficacy of pupil premium spend.
Okay, so there is a significant crossover between pupil premium and SEND. Don't have the figure to hand, apologies. But you know Kate Wilkins, I think she's been here, she's helped you with the report. She is monitoring that. She's working with the SEND team in terms of a joint project to look at the outcomes for those pupils. So it is something we're cited on, and the work is continuing with that. In terms of monitoring the spend, the governors, they have a role to do that. There has to be a report, an annual report on that, and that has to be published on the website. Where we're responsible directly for schools through SIAs, then that's part of the work that goes on within those schools as well.
That makes, the crossover point makes me even more worried, because what that indicates is that the non-SEND disadvantaged students are having even worse outcomes. Because if the SEND is generally slightly positive and the disadvantage is negative,
Might be useful for us to break all that, the data down for you in terms of the groups, and then we can have a closer look at that. Yeah.
Anything else, Helen? Trevor?
Very sort of general question, really. There's obviously a massive statistics in the report here, and it's always a problem with statistics is to work out what's significant and what isn't. So, for example, some of the benchmarking seemed as if it's not really particularly significant as a statistical basis. So I just wonder, obviously you're looking at it as educationalists, and members of the committee will be looking at it as educationalists. Do you ever run these past somebody who's not an educationalist but is a statistician and understands statistics, and who can say to you, look, that's important, you need to do some work on that. That maybe looks a bit strange, but don't worry about it because it's within the limits of statistical variability, so it's not a problem. Do you ever do that sort of thing?
The DFE do that for us. So we have statistical significance. So we will say sig minus, sig plus. We use that language, and that's where they carry that out. So we do have that when the information comes through from the DFE and it's all been, cleansed and everything. So yes, we do have that. And I think that's a really useful point. But I would say we do need to hang on to whether it's significant or not. These are children's life chances. And, I've been criticised in the past quite vocally for talking just about statistics and because I think we do need to hang on to that. It was a good challenge that these are children we're talking about. So even one or two, that's important to us. But to answer your question, yes, we do get, and we get that from the DFE. So it's the national data set that then goes through that bit of cleansing and then sharing with us.
Anybody else? There's some things when you're on these ones and have been around a while that you're always looking at. I remember if we were doing corporate parenting, we were talking about health checks or dental checks, we'd be saying forever these numbers haven't looked like they should. And for me, I'm afraid that the gap that there is with disadvantaged learners is one of those things for me. It's too big a gap that's been going on for too long. So what can we do? I mean, we held a task group. We brought some thoughts forward in June last year. There's been, but this gap that there is between the achievements for our disadvantaged learners and our dare I call them mainstream or whatever is too big. It's not resolving, and it's almost getting worse. And when we've got above average for mainstream, but below average or national figures for disadvantaged. So that gap in Wiltshire is wider than it is elsewhere in the country. What can we do about this? It's a genuine ask, and as a committee, what can we do about this? I mean, You know, when we talked about this in the pre-meet, we talked about another task group and whether doing that, or is that just throwing lip service at it? We've got to get a grasp on this, haven't we? Because it's been forever. There's been this gap.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's, you know, as with the Sen, we take no consolation that this is a Southwest issue, very much in the Southwest. And the regional director, I know, is very concerned about this. And that doesn't give us much comfort. So that in terms of the Wiltshire Learning Alliance, we wanted this to be one of their priorities. And they were talking about, you know, for me, I think it's the whole system approach. Schools can do so much, and they have the funding, and they should be doing that, and they can be doing that. But actually, we need the whole system working together. And each bit can have its part to play in this, which is what Kate's looking at in terms of, you know, and the best start in life. You know, it's never giving up on these children and young people, is it? But we need a whole system approach to this in terms of parenting, books in the home, all of this. That's what it needs to be. So, you know, the Wiltshire Learning Alliance, they are committed to this, head scratching, you know, what more can we do? And what they're going to look at is similar to that, we have English hubs, we have math hubs, and that's where the expertise sits. And they work with all schools. You know, for English, it's Ramsbury Hub. We've got an outstanding school leading that really effective practice. They work with the school intensively. They have a program that's approved. So the Learning Alliance are looking at something similar to that for pupil premium, because we know we've got good practice, because I think we need to be careful when we're talking about this. We have some really good outcomes in some schools. Just as we were talking before, in terms of the hub model, there are some really successful schools that are doing well. What we need to do is have a system in place that says, this is our really outstanding practice, and this is how we're going to support across the system. So in terms of the Learning Alliance, they're looking at across the schools, but I think, you know, there's more to do across the whole system.
Left at the yeah, I just need to go. I really, really share your frustration with this, and I kind of feel we've been through this loop so many times, and I agree, we just don't, it's like dental, exactly when you say it's like the dental, we just don't seem to be making any progress. So I'm confident in the new team that we will, you know, get a new plan in place, but it just seems very hard at the moment.
How can scrutiny play a part in helping to address this? I mean, is there looking at best practice in other areas and what they do and where they don't have these gaps? And then I come to Jo.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was going to say. And when you know, when Scrutiny does a kind of research piece in terms of, you know, similar authorities, Stat Neighbours that are doing better. I'm not saying that, you know, and as Helene said, we've got to look outside the Southwest. There are some, you know, there are lots of conversations happening with the DFE in terms of, you know, this position the Southwest don't want to be in. There's been some discussions around sort of social mobility, specifically in the Southwest, off the back of some, I think it was University of Exeter did some research. So there is a lot happening, but there, you know, I accept that you want to be able to do more and contribute to this. So I think that sort of research piece may be really helpful.
So I suppose the thing I'm probably going to just add is probably not adding much into the piece really, but while this will always be a personal bugbear, do I have confidence in the disadvantaged learners strategy and the conversations that we had when we were doing the task group last year, and those conversations with Kate Wilkins, and the understanding of where some of the weaknesses were in our schools and what we could do to put that right? I mean, I have to say, hand on heart, yes, I do have confidence in that. And that's where the difficulty is, because that report and that strategy coming to place at that point, and obviously these are results that couldn't possibly have been affected yet by that strategy, while at the same time wanting to keep foot firmly against the pedal of this is what we have to make a difference. We are an affluent county with lots of schools that still are struggling, possibly have disadvantaged learners as a golden thread through their quality teaching, English hubs, maths hubs, the strategy that Kate is doing. So partly, I find myself on the opposite side. We kind of have to trust that process is there It's at what point we're asking scrutiny, at what point we would expect that tanker to be turning. And that's the bit that I think's frustrating, because with the greatest will in the world, the work that started last summer and was being done there could not have impacted on these results. These results are, are horrible, but we have to just keep that scrutiny. But I do trust where that strategy is.
I absolutely agree with Joe there, I think. But I wonder what level of variation there is within schools within the county. And there might be local champions that we could start to use in local centres of expertise.
So that's what we're saying in terms of the Learning Alliance. And as Andrew said at the beginning, we need to look at the outcomes alongside our Ofsted judgments. Okay, we are below national in terms of good and outstanding schools. Therefore, there's of course there's a correlation between our outcomes. So we need to concentrate on that, making sure every school good or better, because that will lift everything up, as well as the sharp focus. Really good work last year in terms of this group with the deep dive, that intense look at pupil premium. So there are the two bits that need to come together, because, Southwest is Southwest. We're interested in Wiltshire, aren't we? We're interested in these young people, making sure their life chances are where they need to be. So we've got those two bits coming together. So I think we do need to think, not just in terms of the good and outstanding schools, but the work you've heard in terms of the school improvement framework, how that's going to impact on this work as well. And I agree with Joe. It's the work has been going on for a while, but it hasn't had the chance to impact on the results just yet.
And that, can I answer that, Helene, as well? Yeah, so I think that, there are schools that are champions. So if you're looking at some of our pupil premium ambassador schools where there's specific strength, we are utilising their skills and expertise in supporting other schools as well. We have quite a strong and active disadvantaged learners network as well, with overall good participation, but it does raise a question in terms of some schools that don't participate as well. So that's something again, and that's where I suppose our academy partners are quite key in terms of them maximising engagement, both at a maintained level and an academy level as well, in terms of some of the networks that exist too. But, there are some good examples of best practice. As a side point, at the last Wiltshire Learning Alliance, because it's high on the agenda, we had someone from Cabot Learning Federation in Bristol share their attendance strategy, because it was absolutely at the kind of root of that was disadvantaged learners. And so they were saying, and because they were looking at some of their evidence as well, that was having an impact because that was absolutely front and key in terms of their whole attendance strategy. So it's learning again from other schools, other trusts, other local authorities that's helping us on that journey. I think that my cautionary point is I think it's that balance between introducing other new things and really embedding what we have as well. And sometimes my little anxiety is putting more things or more resource in, when actually sometimes what we need to do is we've got some things quite well established now, is really embedding that to then see hopefully that come through the data in the next 2 or 3 years.
I'm just reluctant waiting 2 or 3 years to find out, because we've been waiting. Someone asked me earlier on how long I've been chairing the committee, and it's 11 years now. We've been waiting that long, plus the 4 years before that. I really am deeply disturbed that we're not moving forward with these. Mike.
Thank you, Chair. You asked the question, how, from a scrutiny point of view, what can we do about this? Now, we hear about pupil premium. Can we challenge or ask for information as to how individual schools are actually spending that pupil premium? I believe, I stand to be corrected, but I believe the practice is for most of them to just spend it on additional teaching assistants. But can we not challenge that and have that information? And if it is being spent on teaching assistants, ask specifically what those teaching assistants are doing for those disadvantaged pupils?
I'm looking for officer advice on that. I don't think that's a bad idea.
Well, in terms of, for me as the governors have that responsibility in terms of then scrutinising how schools are effectively spending their pupil premium money. They are required to report on that, and that should be on the websites as well. So certainly in the context of our maintained schools, you know, when we've got our school improvement advisors in, they can challenge schools, and quite rightly as well, in terms of how then that spend is being used to best improve outcomes for children and young people on the ground. But I'd see that as part of that governance role as well. And so within that, that's also part of our training for governors too, in terms of governors discharging their functions and duties around understanding the kind of challenge as well in their individual schools about the performance of pupil premium students as well. So that comes back to some of our own governor services advice, guidance, which I think is very good in terms of then supporting governors in terms of discharging their functions.
Helen.
Yeah, in terms of what this committee can do, I wonder whether there's another deep dive exercise where we start looking at the detailed data from schools, because we should start to see if the practices being recommended are being followed. This is about the time of the year where we should be able to start to see any impact on internal assessments. And so I wonder whether there's a small group of us who need to work on looking at pupil premium expenditure, what they spend it on, the level of disadvantaged pupils in the school, what type of school they are, what measures they take, what their outcomes are, and what they have been in the past. All those kind of little data items to get a kind of big picture across the county, so we can then start to help on the beacon of excellence type model to say, well, these schools within the county are doing really well. Is there any way that we can encourage other schools to take some of that up?
That's. I wonder if a way forward on this is, I will be honest, I'm like a dog with a bone on this one now, but I do hear the comments that have been made this morning. And I think we've got to be careful we don't rush into doing something just because it's doing something. I think there's been some helpful suggestions, particularly the pupil premium and how we could look at that pupil premium one. I wonder if a way forward on this one is if we take this away and maybe we could meet up and have a conversation about some potential things we could do and bring that back to the next committee, because that gives a little bit more time for what's happening to bed in. I think actually through the Learning Alliance and the new hub model, there may be ways of approaching all of this. So maybe we can look at how it, but I can't let this go now. I think this gap is too big and it's for too long. But I don't think it's just a South West issue, to be honest with you. You only need to look nationally at the gap between all pupils and disadvantaged pupils. There shouldn't be a gap, should there? So it's a national issue. It's just even bigger here than it is elsewhere. So are you happy that I'll take that away, talk to, and then we'll bring back some suggestions to the next meeting? Yeah, lovely, thank you. Okay, so let's move on then to the executive response on the rapid scrutiny and high needs block funding, which we're not getting. There was some confusion regarding the executive response to this one, in so much as, and here's the good news, all of the recommendations were accepted, but because of that, there wasn't a recognition that we were going to be getting a formal report and all the rest of it on it. So we will get one. It will come to the next meeting because that is the proper process. But I have been reassured that in terms of the recommendations being agreed, they have been agreed with. And we'll just get a written response saying that they have been agreed with. And I'm just looking over at officers and I'm getting nods and a thumbs up. So that's good. So we'll move on to the Forward Work Programme, pages 95 to 122. I don't know how others feel, but I do have to say I think this new format of how we're receiving it makes it much easier to follow what's happening and when it's happening and when it's coming to. So thank you, Marie, for your work on that. Any thoughts, any comments? Clearly you can see, following our annual meeting with the exec, our Forward Work Plan is being beefed up slightly. They are live documents. They are always subject to change, particularly if a member of the committee comes up with something they'd like us to change on them. So, any comments from anybody? Oh, Helen, yes, yes.
Given the previous conversation, can I suggest that an item in next January or March's meeting is looking at disadvantaged learners in schools?
Well, certainly an item in next January, February's meeting will be the performance results again. And trust me, we'll be looking. But let's put a reminder into ourselves that we will be focusing on what's happened with the gap during that period. Lee.
Might also want an interim update from the task group in terms of the work that's going on around this. Because the thing about this is we only know from 1 year to the next, don't we? And then it's frustrating. We're in March now. Exams are coming up. You know, we're talking about almost a year ago in terms of that. So if we get an update from that task group, and I would suggest that in terms of the attendance, the standing agenda item on attendance, someone we can make a difference about quickly is the attendance of the disadvantaged. So if we ask Catherine Davis to include the breakdown of all pupils, but then disadvantaged as well. And I think committee might appreciate seeing that.
Thank you. That would be really helpful.
Just really quick point. The Fostering Excellence Task Group, the expected report date actually just says today. So just a point.
Noted. Thank you. That's just there to test if anyone's reading it, you see. Brilliant. Okay, nothing else. So date of our next meeting is Tuesday, 6th of June here at County Hall. Just a forewarning for you, the September meeting, do you remember last time I said it was subject to change because there were some problems with the date? Looks like that's going to be moving to Thursday, the 21st of September. There just wasn't a Tuesday or Wednesday available for it to go to. So Thursday, 21st of September. Thank you. We have no urgent items. I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much.